Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You find us online through our portal at tertiumquids.org, podcasts of previous shows, white papers on different issues that are going through right now the Virginia General Assembly. A weird confluence this past week as Valentine's Day, crossover, and Ash Wednesday all fell on the same day. And infer what you will from them, I thought wistfully that perhaps it would be nice if the senators sent their bills over to the House with a box of chocolates. But let's talk about where we stand at crossover as these bills now start to flesh out what bills made it, which ones didn't, and which ones may have only seen one version make it across. Joining us now from the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, and he is the great Caleb Taylor. Thank you very much. He's the Director of Legislation Reform for Tertium Quids. Caleb, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me. I think it's funny that we had this confluence on Wednesday because it seems like the House and the Senate are kissing, and Jesus is crying just a little.
Just a little bit, and we don't have 40 days of penitence to follow, perhaps.
I think yes, 40 days of whipping ourselves.
Wandering the desert ourselves, looking for answers. Let's start with one that's coming up. We're going to talk with Senator Chap Petersen on the program, and I also got a chance to talk to some of the other very interesting bipartisan group of legislators who are aligning and trying to get some traction against this Dominion plan that would basically take the requirements of them getting their rates checked by the government as regularly as they do now and moving that back and giving them the opportunity to hold on to any overcharges as long as they say they're going to use it on something that involves electric generation. HB 1558 and Senate Bill 669, Caleb, both made it through crossover and went on to the other House, I believe, but the House had a dramatic debate over this before it went over. Talk about where this stands right now.
Where it stands right now is actually kind of interesting. I think that this was kind of a power play, given that healthcare and Medicaid has been such a huge deal this session. I feel like this was kind of a maneuver through the political system to kind of get something that Dominion or the supporters of Dominion legislature have wanted for a long time. Mm-hmm. But as soon as kind of the grassroots found out about it, realized what was going on, phone calls started being made, emails started happening, and that's what you saw because the grassroots really got wind of this right maybe a week, 2 weeks before crossover, and started getting really hot. Mm-hmm. Things started getting really hot down at the legislature. And so we hit crossover. It makes its way over into the House, and suddenly we're starting to see a coalition build against it. And so what we're seeing is the original bills have kind of been scaled back, and every time these bills hit a new committee, they just get tweaked slightly and scaled back just a little bit more. And what they're trying to do is at the same time that they're trying to push this through, they're trying to, at the same time, appease the grassroots. And it just goes to show how really important those phone calls and emails are. Because this would have I guarantee you, from what we heard 2 weeks ago, this would have just slid through like buttered rails. I mean, it would have just right on through had nobody ever said anything.
Well, and talk about that. You mentioned everyone was kind of caught up in the idea of Medicaid expansion, those kind of things. So the grassroots was not looking at Dominion and Appalachian Power as coming for this control. But does this also give us an opportunity, and I'm going to do this with Senator Petersen a little bit later on the program, to discuss, are we doing ourselves, our communities, those we're supposed to be representing, a disservice by continuing to promote this idea of electric monopoly in and of itself?
You might be absolutely right with that, and there are some fundamental issues with the kind of way that we do things, and it's been the kind of the realm of the ivory tower over the last 20 or 30 years to debate exactly that. Is there a better way of doing this? Is there a better way of getting out from under the issues with, the open access problem or the tragedy of the commons and moral hazard and political situations, et cetera, and so on. But, we haven't come up with anything yet, or at least nothing that anybody can agree to. Mm-hmm. So we're still kind of floundering. The only thing that we have right now as a stopgap measure, and it really just is that, it's a stopgap measure, is individuals. And I mean that literally. I don't mean big organizations. AFP does a great job. Tertium Quids, the Tuesday morning group, we're out there every single day slogging it out in the halls of the legislature, the Tea Party. But really what counts are those phone calls and emails from individuals who live in these legislators' districts.
Yep.
Calling them and telling them, no, I don't want to double pay for Dominion power, and no, I don't want to pay for Medicaid expansion, especially when it's already 30% of the budget.
And if shameless self-promotion, if you sign up at tertiumquids.org during General Assembly sessions and wherever applicable, we send out alerts and email alerts each morning saying here's who's looking at what, when, where, and why, even to the kind of sub-secret committees that sometimes you don't even know. The committees just have a standing meeting on a Tuesday, and you don't know what's on their docket, and all of a sudden something's moved forward and you didn't even know it was being discussed. So these things are a great utility to getting to tertiumquids.org for that, and perhaps we will see these pared back to the point where I think with this sort of group effort behind it, Republicans and Democrats, I would harken back. I used to live in Buffalo, and Niagara Falls was a crippled economy on the New York side because for many years they benefited from having inexpensive electricity because they generated it there. And then the New York State Power Authority said that's not fair because New York City. And they insisted that everyone pay the same. And all the places like Carborundum and DuPont closed up and left us with things like Love Canal in that area. So I'm not saying one led to the other, perhaps causation and correlation, but those factories were there because the energy was inexpensive because that community took it upon themselves to generate the electricity and almost farm to table, if you will. But we see this all the time. We see big electric companies in big metropolitan areas collapsing, like Consolidated Edison collapses and gets bought up by 6, 7, 8 different utilities, and now it's this massive, almost entirely northeastern company called Keyspan. And how is that representing the individuals who live in those areas? Virginia still has a few choices with the co-ops, but I really think, even with the model of the telephone deregulations, we could look at a way to deregulate without, unfairly punishing Dominion for the investments into the power generation plants and everything.
I mean, and you're absolutely right. The biggest question from an economic standpoint about this particular situation is, or the biggest concern really, is that, when the state government, when the Commonwealth comes to bat for Dominion, and Dominion has put a lot of money into the energy infrastructure of Virginia, appreciated, and they should receive profit for that. There's nobody saying that that's not the case. The issue is when the Commonwealth comes to bat for Dominion, it effectively saves them from some of the risk of that investment. And as we know, anybody who's ever investment implies risk.
Sure.
And when you save them from that risk, while at the same time protecting their profits or allowing them to double their profits or increase their profits or what have you in this case, what that does is it creates a perverse incentive structure for Dominion to continue doing. So right now, they're spending a huge amount of money investing in politicians.
Right,
as
and
opposed to investing into energy infrastructure.
I wanted to ask you about that because much has been made about whether or not we should ban these government overseen utilities from political activity. And of course, you'll immediately hear people say, well, I thought you guys were free speech and I thought money equals speech and blah, blah, blah. But, there's a certain point where if you're a university or you're a government employee, you're not allowed by I'm trying to remember the name of the law. I was about to call it the Mann Act, but that's not it. But if you're a federal employee or a government employee or a soldier, active duty military, engaging in political activities is illegal. So if an individual can't do it, certainly a protected enterprise, a protected monopoly shouldn't be allowed to.
No, you're absolutely right. We should be very, very clear. If there is a monopoly, a protected monopoly, as you've said, because that's the only kind of monopoly that exists, is a protected monopoly. If there is a company that is in cahoots, quote unquote, with the government, then their employees in that company are employees of the government. And if they are employees of the government, they don't get to just continuously pump money into political campaigns. I'm completely okay with businesses or organizations out there doing what they have to do. Well, I'm not sure I'm completely okay with it. We can have a long conversation about it, but the issue is when the government is effectively funding its own campaigns.
Yeah.
When the government is voting to increase profits, and a portion of those profits come back to the government through their through their campaigns, there's an issue there. I mean, that's also the same problem that we've had for years with unions in some northern states.
Yeah, prevailing wage issues with that. Caleb Taylor, legislative director at Tertium Quids, talking about the General Assembly session. I want to spend a little time, and we could spend weeks on the deregulation of the electric industry, but it looks like the General Assembly has heard from the Vox Populi. What about the civil asset forfeiture tweaking that is going to hopefully put in requirements, as stunning as we would have to say this, that you have to be convicted of something first before you lose your property?
Well, so far we're doing pretty well with that. Not gangbusters or anything, but notably Delegate Freitas's bill, HB 900, made it through the House. Currently in the Senate, and his bill is very comprehensive. It's a big bill. But it does establish some new rules that are really, really good. One, reporting on where that money comes from. Mm-hmm. If it's who was it taken from, for what reason, and where that money was spent. Because we've had a problem in the state of Virginia with police offices and Department of Justice offices taking asset forfeiture money and buying birthday gifts for their employees.
Good God.
That is not what that money is for.
No, absolutely not.
But that's one. And the second thing is like you said, requiring that an actual criminal conviction occur. Because right now in the state of Virginia, you don't even have to be charged. There's one recent one that I was reading about. Not recent. It was back in 2014. A gentleman who owned a barbecue restaurant down in Staunton gets pulled over for having tinted windows in Fairfax. They take $18,000 in cash from him because it happens to be in his car. Mm-hmm. It's the proceeds from his barbecue restaurant, and he's going to buy more equipment so he can expand his business, which every single legislator up there says we need to expand small business, right?
Yeah. But
and they take this money, his business closes. He eventually gets the money back, but not before he has to spend thousands of dollars on lawyers and everything else, because this is a civil action. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have the same rights as he would in criminal court. And that's what it comes down to. And that happened here in Virginia. And we've got story after story after story of this kind of thing happening. Freitas's bill, as well as a Peake bill, also mm-hmm. passed through the Senate and is on its way to the House. Does something similar in terms of criminal conviction and reporting. One of his bills didn't make it. I can't remember off the top of my head. But
well, I know that Peak
yeah.
has a bill that is protecting that, and it's important that we do this because it is, I guess, been just engrossed in Virginia common law. But you see this from the federal government on down, and it brings us to a case where we're trying to tweak the language in the eminent domain laws regarding lost profits as well. But you see how punitive prosecutions, and I would, as to tweak and toe the line, perhaps persecutions, can drive somebody to plead guilty to somebody lest they bankrupt themselves in their defenses.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the biggest problems with the civil asset forfeiture regime in Virginia right now. Is the average taking, the average amount that's taken, and whether it's real property or in financial property in money, is a little over $1,000, about $1,600. Well, on average, it costs about $3,000 to defend that in court.
Gee.
So suddenly, these, and not only that, if it's more than that, the very first thing that the local Commonwealth attorneys or Department of Justice does is go to the person they took the money from and offer them a deal for half.
It's amazing to me that we get away with this. This is how the mob used to work in Chicago and Brooklyn. This is not how civilized people are supposed to be a representative republic, Caleb.
That's right. You're dead right, and it's amazing to me that this would even exist. This is like you're right. This is mafia. This is North Korea stuff. I mean, it's
what do we do? I mean, when you see Commonwealth's attorneys and prosecutors that make their bones by their conviction rate, and I know that it's important that we have these constitutional offices, but I think it's imperative that we, as advocates for the citizens, get out there and say, listen, don't just judge your Commonwealth's attorney by how many, quote, bad guys he puts away, because often that includes a bunch of good guys because he just wants a big number.
And you're absolutely right. And it's not just kind of defending. It's not just defending the citizenship. It's defending the law enforcement as well.
True.
Because if law enforcement is suddenly incentivized to be the robber, and if they're suddenly incentivized to be the robber, then they're the robber. And everybody in the society who really, truly needs to be able to trust those agents of law enforcement to protect them using the law, they're suddenly worried that now they're going to be robbed because of the law. How much respect does that create? And what kind of attitude, what kind of relationship does that make between communities, especially poorer communities, and law enforcement? We're already having a problem with that. If you haven't watched the news feeds and the Facebook timelines, there's been 2 cops being shot a day now. I know
it's and that is perhaps the defining issue in the society right now is our lack of trust in our justice system, and yet here we are doing. We have a simple thing we can do that can establish some of that back, and we don't seem to want to do it.
Absolutely. It boggles my mind.
Well, so that seems to be getting better through the legislative process, going through the legislative update. Quickly, what other things are you watching, and where do we stand with so many of them?
I think, kind of going back a little bit in the conversation, the most important thing that we're looking at right now is Medicaid.
Medicaid expansion.
And this is a very back and forth situation. We had a lot of successes early on. The straight up Medicaid bills have mostly been killed. The issue is that we have a number of Republicans that are interested in expanding Medicaid, and by any means necessary, whether it's ACA expansion or just straight up Virginia expansion. They feel like they need to do it, and I don't know if political expediency just trumps the laws of economics, but that's what's going down. So there's a couple of things to worry about here. One of the things to worry about is that they're trying to get this passed through the budget using a number of what seemingly innocuous legislative vehicles through either the House or the Senate. One of these being a bill whose number I can't remember, but we're kind of referring to it as the Miaris bill because it's patroned by Miaris.
Okay.
So what is happening is they're not putting in the bills a vehicle for funding their projects, and they're planning to just enter that into the budget as it comes through.
Oh.
And that is a really backdoor way of doing things.
It's backdoor. I mean, it's hiding it from public scrutiny.
Yeah, and to anybody who's ever been involved in this, the budget bill, I don't think I've ever met anybody who can just read the budget bill and just tell you what it means. It is so easy to hide things in those bills.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because they're very complicated and they're very obnoxious, and that's just what it is. So we're seeing that. Another thing is back in 2013, there was an amendment to the budget called the Stanley Amendment, and this is mostly because back in those days, they were worried about Medicaid expansion again, still fighting the same fight. And the language on the budget bill was very kind of wishy-washy. Well, a couple of champions of liberty on health care said we need stronger language. One of these being Dick Black, a couple of other guys. And Stanley himself is the one who actually wrote the language. They started calling it the Stanley Amendment, and what it did, it restricted the ability of the governor to unilaterally expand. Well, one of the things that we're really, really looking for is, are they going to put the Stanley Amendment back in the budget? And I think that one of the things they're going to try to do is sneak the budget through without the Stanley Amendment, which would then allow Northam to unilaterally just expand Medicaid on his own.
With it, yeah, and I've heard that there was a backdoor. I didn't know what the process was. So by just not inserting the Stanley Amendment, then the government would say, "Oh, okay, I can do this," and just scribble out one number and put in another.
Yeah, so right. So from our Tertium Quids and the Tuesday Morning Group, as well as the coalition that we've formed on healthcare, what we've been asking people to do is two things. One, contact your legislator, senator, delegate, everybody. Contact them. One, tell them no to Medicaid expansion, any Medicaid expansion. Absolutely not. We need reform, not expansion. You don't reinvest in something that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Two, tell them to insist upon the Stanley Amendment in the budget. Insist upon it. We want to see the Stanley Amendment in the budget, and just hammer it home. Call them every day. I don't care. Be obnoxious, because the phone calls and the emails, they're the things that really you should see the General Assembly when the phones are ringing off the hook. Mm-hmm. You should see how these guys look. They look nervous. They're not comfortable. They don't like being talked to.
Well, and they know, and this is why Jefferson and Madison insisted on a government that should be closer to the citizens, because these guys and gals in the General Assembly know that there's a chance they'll run into you in a grocery store or at a pancake breakfast or at a gas station, and they don't want to have to answer to the fact that you ignored them.
Yeah. And the craziest thing to me about all of this is, we've got 5 or 6 different delegate senators that are, people that we need to concentrate on. But the most hilarious thing to me is that just recently, earlier this year, the Incumbent Protection Act was found unconstitutional. So now, none of these guys really do have to worry about being primaried. They need to worry about making it through the convention.
Right, exactly. And that's the bigger question. It's one of these days, and somebody asked me just out of, I think we were in our cups, and he said, "What do we do about this, Joe?" My only thought is, at some point or another, the political parties have to lose their guaranteed ballot status. So even the parties have to go out and get signatures each year to get on the ballot, so that it goes back to being about the candidates that are representing the communities, not the parties picking somebody that, I don't know, has done the right things for them or been a good guy for all these years, like Jack Palance said in Batman, "You're my number one guy." Anyway, so, hey, Caleb, thank you so much. And again, this is why I said, you need to go to tertiumquids.org. You get daily email updates from Tertium Quids detailing who's got what committees meeting. Yes, can you do it yourself? It is immensely difficult. You got to go to the lis.virginia.gov and then look and see whose committees are doing what and then what's on the docket. Caleb and all the folks there, the legislative team at Tertium Quids, have made it as easy as possible for you to know the phone numbers and email addresses of these folks who don't want to know that their constituents are freaking out over something they may be allowed to happen.
That's right, and we've got a really broad coalition out there right now that runs all the way from moderates to hardcore conservative, go to every one of these websites. Go to the Tertium Quids website. Sign up for the Tuesday morning group meeting. Go to the Tea Party website. Go to AFP's website, AFP Virginia's website. Go to Middle Resolution's website. Go to the Virginia Healthcare Freedom website. We have a huge coalition right now that is just fighting as hard as we can to stop this and be a part of that fight. Because really, you're the most important part.
And be ready for 2019 when we have every seat in the Virginia General Assembly up for election at the same time.
That's right.
Caleb, thank you again so much. It's tertiumquids.org. Thank you, and you have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining us this morning. Senator Chap Petersen of the 34th District is up next here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Joining us now from the 34th Senate District, you can find him online at fairfaxsenator.com, is Chap Petersen, the man who single-handedly brought the bow tie back to the Virginia General Assembly. Chap, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me. Good to be on.
Happy Valentine's Day, Ash Wednesday, and or Crossover Day, whichever one and in the hierarchy you choose to look at them. Hey, a quick question, just apropos of nothing. When the bills go crossover and it's this close to Valentine's Day, do you send with chocolates or a card or anything?
No, I will say that our crossover in the Senate was yesterday, so I did go home last night. I mean, we basically get kind of a half-day break because there were no committees on crossover day, so I actually went home and took my wife out, so I did enjoy that.
Good job there. We wanted to talk to you some about these, what I'm referring to as Dominion Protection Acts or Utility Protection Acts. It's not just Dominion, it's also Appalachian Power. And you, along with many Republicans and Democrats, it's truly a bipartisan group of senators and delegates oppose the passage of this legislation. But first, for our listeners who may just be hearing it and in some cases heard it referred to as a massive tax increase, the ultimate in cronyism, tying it back to political contributions by Dominion. Explain a little bit about what Dominion wants out of this, because it has to do with their rates and then what happens to overcharges, correct?
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And this all dates back to 2015 when we passed a law called the rate freeze, which was sort of pitched to us, the Assembly, as a consumer protection issue. It was the exact opposite. It allowed Dominion to lock in electricity rates at above market prices and have people overpay by a factor of several $100 million for the last 3 years. It was really outrageous. Mm-hmm. And so Virginians, as a result, overpaid for electricity. Our bills went up while the rest of the nation saw their bills going down. And people like myself protested and said, this is not right, we need to fix this, and brought legislation in 2018. I actually brought legislation in 2017, but I brought it again in 2018 to undo the rate freeze and give refunds back to consumers. And the way you do that is by have what's called the State Corporation Commission that actually would review the books of the monopolies and make sure that they're only allowing their utilities to recover their costs plus a small profit. Well, that was my bill. It was very simple. It was about 6 paragraphs. And instead, somewhere along the way, it got hijacked and turned into a 60-page bill with all sorts of goodies and treats for Dominion and Appalachian Power, which allowed them to keep the profits and reinvest them in new projects, and then see those new projects create even more revenues and profits, and it's just been a complete cluster.
Well, and I see that was the most stunning part of this bill is the idea that, okay, if we overcharge, what we'll do is we'll just use that money and then we don't have to give it back. Chap, it's stunning to me that they have the idea that they can do this. I certainly think it points to some of the problems with public utilities, but I think a listener would be fairly understood if they felt like that was the whole point of the State Corporation Commission, was this kind of oversight on a regular basis and looking through their books. And if I'm not mistaken, I have a letter here from John Dudley to yourself and many other folks that is remarkably critical of this bill in and of itself.
Yeah, and look at it this way. I believe in free markets. I'm sure the listeners on your station believe in free markets, and that's the most efficient way to allocate goods and services typically. However, where you have a utility that has to provide power to every citizen of Virginia, then you're going to have oftentimes a monopoly situation where we have one utility, we give them the monopoly, and we charge them with making sure that everybody gets adequate power. The flip side of that is by giving them the monopoly, we also need to have some way to control them and make sure they don't mark up prices and basically, price people into oblivion. And that's why historically we've had the State Corporation Commission to, again, regulate monopolies, not free market companies, not free competition companies, but monopolies, and make sure that they don't overcharge their customers. And that's why I've been adamant about voting against any bill that would reduce that oversight.
Well, and certainly these utilities are licensed by the government, given that permission to be that monopoly. Is there a reasonable thought, and this was theoretical stuff I got in with David Toscano from the House of Delegates regarding this, is this someplace where you could stop and say, look at what they did with AT&T when they broke up the phone company and that kind of thing, and say maybe there is at some point a better way to do this to allow for marketplace pressures?
You know what? We deregulated in 2000. Well, gosh, in the 90s we deregulated. That was before I came into the Assembly. I came in 2001. It did not work. That's not to say it won't work if you don't try it again. We also have co-ops in the Commonwealth which have survived. We have one in Northern Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
I know there are some spread out across rural areas that basically are a holdover from the 30s, which still provide power and services, within a defined area, and they do it for the benefit of their customers. They're not for-profit entities. So there are different ways to do this. I mean, I have thought about, without actually investigating how it would happen, how do you kind of break up the power? I mean, in my opinion, a company like Dominion has too much power. They have too much power in the General Assembly. They have just, too much power to affect people's lives, to put people out of business. How do you make it so that consumers have choice? How do you make it so that you have some protection from a General Assembly which is receiving money from these companies? How do you create a nonpartisan, non-political body to put a check on them?
Oh, yeah.
These are the things that keep me awake at night.
Well, you and me both, because these are some of the most seminal issues in not just the Dominion issue, but so many other places we find it, where we say, well, can we get a nonpartisan group together? And then you look at any courtroom, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and you say, well, hold it, they're all, this one was appointed by Bob McDonnell, and this one was appointed by, so you start saying, well, are these nonpartisan groups? We already have nonpartisan. It's gotten crazy to that end, and I guess that's where we find ourselves, Chap.
Yep, it has. Again, it's it is kind of in a lot of ways going to be the 21st century, maybe the 21st version of civil rights or gay rights or whatever cause you want to sort of link it to. That you have these very powerful corporate monopolies, and individual consumers feel helpless in front of them.
Is this something, though, because there's such a group like yourself and Bill Stanley and Dave Toscano and Lee Ware and folks from both political parties involved in this, right. You also look at some of the, the environmentalist groups who want, alternative energies and things like that. Are we harming the ability to investigate new energy sources or storage sources like battery systems by eliminating that kind of competition, Chap?
Yeah, here's one of the issues with alternative energies, renewables. The current system, in my opinion, discourages renewables, and the reason is you've only got one buyer. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you want to create a solar facility, if you want to create a wind facility, and you want to sell it into the marketplace, unless you're going to use it to power your own farm or your own factory, and most of us don't have that, you're going to need to sell it into the market. But, there's only one buyer, and that's Dominion. And if you can't make a deal with them, you're out of luck. And we need to find some way to kind of disaggregate the energy grid so that people can, come up with renewables and finance new opportunities and then sell the power into the grid in a way that they can find willing buyers. Because right now it's really impossible. Well,
and I know that a lot is made, and to take the devil's advocacy position, Dominion will say, well, building a power plant is a pretty big expense and that kind of thing. But we see other industries. We see a space program privatized. So I guess if the space program can be privatized, anything can.
Well, I mean, if you look at the telecom companies, you mentioned AT&T earlier. I mean, telecom has been completely demonopolized, and you wouldn't have imagined that in my youth. Okay, right. I mean, everybody used Bell Telephone, and now, I mean, we've got dozens of phone companies offering dozens of products, and communications have increased exponentially.
Well, and that's another point in this is when you look at it, you as our founder John Taylor is proud to have said for many times is when the phone company was a monopoly, the only upgrade to the phone was going from rotary to touch tone. When they deregulated it, all of a sudden I have a computer in my pocket that's got more computing power than the first.
It's amazing what's happened with telecom once you introduce competition.
Chap, I wanted to ask another quick question. I know that it's theoretical because you haven't gone into the room yet to talk about it, but you sit on a committee that's going to look on the civil asset forfeiture law that's coming through that would require somebody to actually be convicted of a crime before a municipality, a police department can take their property. Is that something? And tell me about the committee you're sitting on. Where do you sit on the idea of fixing the civil asset forfeiture laws as they come forward?
I have been a critic of forfeiture. I've also had a bill which I call reverse forfeiture, which allows a criminal suspect to actually get back their private property when the police decide not to charge him. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes in some cases, and I've had these clients, they refuse to return the private property, even though they didn't have enough evidence to bring a criminal charge.
It's amazing.
And so to me, it's an ongoing issue of due process. Yeah. You need to if you don't have the evidence to convict somebody, then you need to return the property. And so I've always looked askance at civil forfeiture as a remedy, and I especially look askance at police departments or law enforcement agencies that, again, hold on to property without returning it when they have no probable cause.
Are you hopeful that these fixes can move forward in the Senate and then perhaps make its way to the governor's desk?
I hope so. I'd like to see some good civil liberty bills come out this year. I'm not sure most of mine got killed, although I do have a couple eminent domain bills, which are pro-property rights bills that I think I can get to the governor's desk. So we're fighting.
All right, well, keep up the good work. And again, it's FairfaxSenator.com. FairfaxSenator.com is Chap Petersen's website at the 34th District. And thank you for taking some time out with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
You got it. Thanks so much. Take care.
And thank you for listening this week. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, so long, and thanks for all the fish.